related crisis you may be asking for assistance with. We're also delighted to welcome a new group of peers who've joined, and we now have people who volunteered to be of assistance who are cabin crew and ATCs and maintenance engineers, as well as pilots. So if you need to talk to somebody that can understand your specific area of concern, we aim to help. We don't report to anybody. We're completely independent, and whatever you say to us is completely confidential. So please, if you need us, that's how you can make contact. The details are on the screen. Moving on, I think most of us at this time of year reach a point where we're tired and we're not performing at our peak. And for tonight, I've chosen a slightly lighter theme. So they're slightly more cartoons than usual. And a holiday pre-flight is essential, but maybe not quite the way that these fine gentlemen are doing it on the screen. When one is tired and fatigued, how you feel very much changes how you fly. And that's true also for the performance of the other essential people in the aviation sector, whether it's people like Lauren who help by giving us accurate weather forecasts, or the people in the tower or in the radar rooms, or the people who help with pushback or fueling or whatever it is. Everybody's performance is affected by chronic fatigue. And I think this year, as South Africans, we've been through an awful lot. We're all ready for the end of the year and a nice reset. And apart from the fatigue, we see a lack of tolerance. People are more impatient than normal. And this can lead to all sorts of interesting things in the aviation sphere. We also tend to do things like impose deadlines on ourselves. I will be where I'm supposed to be for holiday when I said I was going to be. Many of us are also under financial strain at this time of year. And if I can sum up the feeling, people are fed up. And this is not a good emotional space for aviation. The airplane doesn't care what you've been through. The weather isn't going to change because of what you feel or what you've been through. It requires the same level of diligence and caution as it always does. And it's very easy to say that we've got all of these feelings because of what we've been through. But how do we deal with this? Well, my favorite approach is a bit of humor. And this is my favorite Far Side cartoon ever. I think the younger generation may not know the genius that is Gary Larson, but this cartoon in various forms has been around now since, I think, the mid-1980s. And that sort of dark humor is very much an aviation favorite. For those who've been following the news this year, our friends at Southwest in the United States have managed to achieve a number of on-time arrivals at the wrong airfield. And I've included this just as a caution about timing is reasonably important, but you actually have to get to where you're going to as well. So how do we deal with all of these emotions and fatigue? The most important I've put up front, literally, acknowledge the limitations of the system, of yourself, your aircraft, up front. Be honest, especially if you're taking passengers, and especially if you're taking passengers who've never flown before. It can be very difficult to be honest that your wonder plane cannot actually carry that extra bag because density altitude is too high, or whatever the reason. But the sooner one acknowledges the limitations, the less pressure you put on yourself. One of my favorite sayings is, it is a mistake to let a mechanical device realize that you're in a hurry, because that is when things tend to go wrong. And that's especially true in aviation. There are always delays, whether it's because somebody popped a tire on the runway, or because the fuel bay wasn't available when you thought it would be. Somehow that 7 o'clock departure never seems to be quite 7 o'clock. Build an extra time. Start looking at the weather a few days before your planned flight. And if possible, make sure that you have got the ability to go either before you had originally planned or perhaps after. It's essential to have backup plans for your backup plans. And more importantly, once you have chosen a course of action, make sure that you reevaluate it. Just because the weather changed and you now need to follow a different route, which was fine when you planned it and looked fine when you adopted it, doesn't mean in half an hour it's still going to be fine. In these talks, we've spoken a lot about acute fatigue and the importance of making sure that you're well rested before flight. This is really very, very important at all times. But when you're suffering from the chronic fatigue of a long year, it's even more important than normal. Try not to skimp on your exercise. Make sure that you are getting enough and the right sort. For those with teenagers, I don't need to remind you about nutrition. For those who don't have teenagers, hangry is a thing. Make sure that you have something nutritious as a snack before your flight. Some biltong, maybe a sandwich. Try and stay away from the heavy carbs and the sugars, because that can make one sleepy. Hydration is vital. And as those of us who fly light aircraft are very much aware, we don't have restrooms on board. So there's often a temptation to skip drinking as much before flight in an attempt to stretch that bladder capacity just an extra half hour. That's not a great strategy. Better have something salty about half an hour before you drink, and that will help you retain the fluids. Try and stay clear of too much caffeine, because the jitters don't help. And of course, the usual punt for some mindfulness. And I don't necessarily mean meditation. The breathing exercises, there's a lot to that old wives' tale about take a deep breath before you start something. It does help to center and focus you. And especially if you're stressed, a good set of box breathing or tactical breathing will help. Given that it's our last session for the year, I thought I'd also share a few quotes that are wisdom from the ages. And some of these you will recognize, some of them you may not. The first one is something that I was taught many moons ago by my primary flight instructor when planning a cross-country in unusual circumstances. Before you go, ask yourself, so if we get there late or a day later, in a year's time, will I actually remember that there was a difference? Think about that before you pressure yourself into going. Another quote, which is a good one to remember when you're under pressure to leave, meet some sort of schedule, get the kids back to school on time. I'd rather be late than dead on time. And if you're really worried about something, it's better to have absolutely no doubt. You will recognize this quote. It's quite a famous one in South African circles. If in doubt, have a beer. That way, you've got 8 hours to figure out what you really need to do. Remember that 8 hours bottle to throttle is a minimum. Please don't press that limit. And for those people who are perhaps under pressure from friends or family or work or school, if you're the pilot in command and you tell people that the aircraft is unfit for flight, it's unfit for flight. Don't allow yourself to be pressured into doing something that makes you worried. And the last 2 quotes are from people who you probably have heard of. The second last one is from Sir Winston Churchill, who actually did learn how to fly, although was prohibited from following through as much as he wanted to. When you're going through hell, keep going. And this is something to bear in mind when one is not enjoying what one is going through. And lastly, I hope you never need this one. And this has been attributed to Chuck Yeager, Bud Anderson, and Bob Hoover. And considering the 3 of them all flew together during the Second World War, it's quite possible that it's any one of those 3. And that is, fly it as far into the crash as possible. Hopefully that's advice that nobody here needs, but just in case. And my last cartoon for the evening is keep thinking out the box. Every now and then something comes along that will make you sit up and take notice or say, that's really impressive, or that is really cool. I hope everybody has a marvelous end of year rest. For those who are getting them, for those who are not, I hope you get rests soon. Fly safe. Remember, Mayday is there if you need to talk to somebody. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Ari, thank you so much. Always good to see a nice cartoon. And I'm glad that it was very light today. But thank you so much, Ari. I appreciate that. I know that it's been a busy time for you. And I know that you're in the midst of load shedding. So thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, next up, we've got Caroline Cole. She's put together a wonderful presentation for us. So Caroline, I'm going to hand over to you so you can share from your side. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, let me just get this going here. So my presentation actually sprang up from an incident that happened to myself, and I was flying with another pilot who wisely asked me to fly with him in the interests of safety because he hadn't flown for a while. And it boils down to what Ari was speaking about how quickly distractions can happen and how quickly these can turn disastrous. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the open door policy. Literally, a lot of accidents tend to be quite senseless, but most of these senseless accidents are those that could have actually been prevented. The loss of aircraft control because of a distraction is such an accident, and a common predictable distraction is a door opening in flight. Exactly what happened with us. So what are the chances of a door opening in flight? Well, that depends if you fly a Cessna or not. Okay, I'm just kidding. Sorry, all the Cessna drivers out there. But in reality, you never know when it could actually happen. So what happens if a door opens in flight? Well, aerodynamically, on most aircraft, the in-flight opening of a forward hinged door is not going to cause any serious changes to the handling or the aerodynamics of the aircraft. On most aircraft, an open door may deflect the airflow, which means that it might require a little bit of input from you as the pilot to maintain direction. We're not talking anything hectic, but it might require some input from you. So what happens next? Normally, well, what we experienced as well was a real increase in the cockpit noise. You'll hear the wind blowing around your head. And of course, at the time, there's major uncertainty as to what has happened because you weren't expecting this door to open. So it always takes, like any event in an aircraft that's abnormal, it's still going to take a few seconds to realize what's actually happened. So very often the pilot panics and stops flying the airplane right there because you're not sure what to do. So you just sit still and do nothing. So particularly during a takeoff at an altitude of 10 feet above ground and a speed that's a few knots below the stall speed, you could imagine how serious this could be. And that's why I'm focusing particularly on this particular distraction on takeoff, because that's one where you are closest to the ground and where things can go wrong quickly. So even if the pilot retains control, but is distracted and gives closing the door the highest priority, the outlook isn't promising. And you think that, well, in theory, you know, okay, well, we're not going to touch the door if the door opens. But I can assure you, in our case, the pilot immediately focused on the door and stopped flying the plane. So the question is, what should I do? Firstly, start off paying particular attention to the pre-flight, especially when you know you're in a hurry. Now you want to go away on holiday. You've got people waiting, people that you want to fly with. It's even more important to be rigorous with your pre-flight. So make sure you check all the door opening and closing mechanisms properly. Check the door alignment. And this was something that we didn't really notice, but the aircraft had just come back from maintenance and the door was actually not properly aligned. That would be a telltale sign as well. So ensure that your passengers know how the mechanism works, because you may have to ask a passenger to at some point close the doors, make sure that they've been briefed and they can actually demonstrate to you how to open and close the door. If you happen to fly a Cessna, make sure that you brief your passengers on that there is the possibility that a door may open. I'm just kidding again, but if you know that your aircraft has got a tendency to possibly do that, make sure you brief your passengers on it. Tell them not to put their cell phones or anything close to the door, and that if it happens, not to panic, that once you airborne and once you stable in straight and level flight, then we can attend to it afterwards. But it's really not something that needs to be an emergency or anything to worry about. Then something which is really, really important is the rejected takeoff brief. So many general aviation pilots neglect to do this. This brief is for yourself, to remind yourself what you will do in the case of any abnormality, such as the door opening. This will increase your preparedness and your ability to manage these types of unexpected situations. So you can do it according to your aircraft type, but in general, if you have any abnormalities before rotation, you want to close the throttle, apply the brakes, and vacate the runway. If you have any abnormalities after rotation and you still have sufficient runway to land on, you'll want to lower the nose, close the throttle, apply flaps as required if you have flap, land back on the runway and apply brakes. And then finally, if you've got any abnormalities after rotation with insufficient runway, you'll want to lower the nose for the best glide speed and state your glide speed as a reminder to yourself what is your best glide speed and trim it. Then, based according to your height above ground, you want to pick a landing area either straight ahead or within 30 degrees of the nose, and state for this particular runway will be on my left, on my right, or straight ahead. Have that place in mind already before you take off. Close the throttle, apply the flaps as required, and then finally switch off fuel and spark. So on takeoff, the thing with the door opening, the first thing you want to do is be able to recognize what's happened and say to yourself, it's okay, this is not a major problem. The actions, remember that the aircraft integrity is not threatened. All your occupants are belted in, nobody's going to fall out. Remember to remind your passengers not to remove to release their seat belts now in an attempt to help you to try and close the door. So if everyone's belted in, no one's going to fall out. In spite of all the noise, the wind, the maps that are flying, the dust and notes in the cockpit, the plane will fly normally. Ignore the door and just fly the plane. Forget the door. It will fly, the aeroplane will fly just fine. Hold your direction. It might need a few little extra inputs, but it's going to fly completely normally. Then after takeoff, you'll want to stay in the circuit pattern and then land and inspect the door properly before closing. If you've just taken off from an airfield, you might as well follow the circuit pattern, land back down, and then give that door a good look over before you decide whether to continue or not. In our case, the hinges were actually completely cracked through. If you can't return and land at that airport, then depart the pattern normally, get into straight and level flight, get yourself up to a safe altitude, check the traffic, make your radio calls, and once everything's settled, then consider attending to the door. Something which is often also nobody seems to pay attention to is take care of your passengers. And as Ari said, bear in mind, some people you may be flying with may have never flown in a light aircraft before. So take care of your passengers who may be rattled by the experience. It's better to land and say, it's okay, let's see what the problem is, and assess the state of your passengers as well. You know, you don't want to force somebody or make somebody's flying experience a bad one because of that. Okay, and lastly, remember, slam the door 3 times before takeoff. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm definitely the passenger in the back there, going ballistic. But I can imagine that, you know, just with all of your training and everything that you got, you remained calm, you remained focused on what you had to do, and sure, thankful that the pilot had you next to him.
Yes, no, Neil, for sure. You know, you never know when these situations are going to occur. And if you haven't been flying regularly, it's really helpful just to take another pilot with you, an instructor with you, because you might not be as proficient in handling these little distractions or any sort of emergency. So very wise decision on the part of the pilot. And I definitely gave him the credit for that.
Cool, but thank you so much for sharing that with us, Caroline. That's very cool. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to our final speaker for the night and for the year. Lauren, are you with us? There we go. She's still in the office, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad that you haven't been called away. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And over to you. You can share your screen.
Thank you so much, Neil. Yeah, let's quickly share. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone can see.
It's coming. There we go.
Okay, fantastic. Right, so yeah, again, thank you, Neil, for that introduction. And yeah, definitely a very big privilege to be part of this team. I learn so much every time. So yeah, we've seen some good animation throughout this evening, but again, one that I would like to emphasize on is this animation. And a well-known author, Richard L. Collins, once said, the best way to stay out of an accident report is to understand and manage the risks inherent to flying every time you get into an airplane. And the book's title, which is actually quite fitting, is The Most Important Hour is Your Logbook, in your logbook. And I think that's very important to take away from you. If that's the only thing that you take away from this year, is that is the only important log hour. So let's go through how to avoid logging any other type of hours in the hospital or anywhere that we don't want those hours logged. So your MET briefing, so hopefully just before you get into the aircraft and having to check the doors and all those type of things like Caroline just spoke about, and you've gone through also your own mental checks and touched on those things that Ari also spoke about. There's obviously now your weather. So to get your weather briefings, there's so many tools out there. But the most important steps is what I'm quickly going to go through, some tips. So obviously your location. So your takeoff location and your landing location. Where are they? Are the topography different? Is one higher topography located higher or lower? Do those things play a role? And if they do, what type of role? So if you're flying from Johannesburg, for example, down to Cape Town, you're going to have pressure level differences. You might have thunderstorms en route, especially over the central parts of the country. Another thing, which season are we in, and all those type of things. So let's start off from the bigger picture, and then we go down to the nitty-gritty details. So it's always bigger picture going to the smaller ones. So we're going to start with your weather pattern. What is your circulation? So your circulation then will lead you to the thoughts of, okay, your winds. What are your forecasted winds en route from your departure to your destination, your surface winds? Have you checked them and are you familiar with those? Are there any strong winds en route? Will that then make your travel time maybe a little quicker? If you've got a tailwind, will it make it a little bit longer if you have a headwind? Those type of things. And then does that then lead to the next question of your fuel preparations? Have you done that? Sorry, excuse me. Then the next thing or parameter to think about maybe is temperature on your cruising level, and then as well as your landing and departure. So that could then lead to questions like, will there be thermals en route, especially if you're in summer, for example, going over that central Karoo and northwest area, where those thermals are quite active, which will then be a bumpy ride, especially if you're in a low level, doing charters this holiday, your passengers would rather prefer smooth flights. Then cloud cover as well. Is it low level clouds? Is it mid-level cloud? What type of cloud are you dealing with? Is it stratiform? Is it clumpy? So are you expecting queues? Are you expecting towering queues? On those type of things. Associated turbulence then is in the next leading question. If you've got those thermals, you already know it's bumpy. Do we have, what type of clouds do we have? So we've got queues maybe developing into TCUs, meaning that your atmosphere is quite unstable. So you could then experience some clear air turbulence in the vicinity, just on the other side of your cloud boundaries. And those type of questions, mountain waves as well, especially if you're coming now down, for example, from the interior down to your coastal areas, look for those offshore winds over those escarpments. Icing is then another hazard as well. I know we're not in a snow or an icy type of climate, but icing is still a thing in South Africa, even if it's light to moderate, especially associated with altocumulus cloud. That's your mid-level cloud. Sometimes your freezing level sits at 12 to 14,000 feet, and we've got then low-level, mid-level cloud, if that makes sense. So your altocumulus can sometimes develop a little bit lower than its normal height in the mid-levels. Here at 16,000 feet is your base, and sometimes then it grows up to about 24,000 feet. It's a nice thick alticu. So sometimes also then flying below that, your freezing level can sometimes still be below, and that can cause some icing on aircrafts. So again, to remember your minimum space of flying below your ceiling, which is also very important. And then I just want to touch on that CAVOC word. To remember what CAVOC really means is that your ceiling is above your minimum sector of your aerodrome. So you can still have cloud when it's CAVOC in the forecast. It just means that your cloud bases are more than 5,000 feet. Okay, so you can still have that alticu in the vicinity. All right, so some pointers now on to where to find all this information. So let's quickly go through the slide. So you'd like to locate your high level pressures, your low level pressure, so that you can now see where your gradients become tighter. So a tight pressure gradient means strong winds. So that gives you then an identification of where that can take place. Identify cold fronts and low pressures along the coast, because coastal lows also affect our airports. So takeoff and landing, you can get it from your takeoff data. So that's a product that we produce for you guys, as well as SIG weather charts. That will also then give you en route weather. Where is your mountain waves, your turbulence, and all those parameters. So we're going to go through the aviation website and quickly touch on another source of information. So after registering on the aviation website, it is for free. The only thing that we do ask of you is your pilot's license, because it's for you, so that we don't have someone coming to use it is for free and it is available for everyone, but it's mainly for pilots. So that is why we kind of keep that kind of strict login just for you guys. So there's plenty of tabs: the home, forecast, observation, domestic, flight briefing, international, aerosport. So under forecast, there you can see you can get your color coded tabs. Which is really nice about those is that you can hover over, for example, that SCT scattered 035. It's highlighted in blue, so you can actually hover over it. It then decodes it for you, as well as in your metas. It does that for you too. You can also see takeoff is also under your forecast. You will also get aerodrome warnings, also color coded, which is really nice because it highlights the weather, so that rain is in red, so it pops out, excuse me, at you. Aerosport tab is also one of my favorites, where you can see you can get cloud cover, convective cloud-based wind, thermals, and temperature forecasts for those time. So it's a time forecast. So if you click on 4 o'clock, it's that forecast for that hour. Okay. You can get a cloud forecast as well, which looks like this picture at the bottom there. It gives you overcast from clear, and it evaluates actually quite well. And then we also have a tab with a spot graph map, which is that one up there with all those little red dots, and you can click on all those red dots individually, and it gives you then, I don't know why this is here, sorry, this vertical cross section, and it goes from the level of where you clicked, so the ground level, and it goes all the way up to, I think that's 40,000 feet. It gives you all the wind bobs, it gives you relative humidity here in a scale of green, as well as temperature. So you'll be able to see where's your freezing level. So a lot of information is given here. One can also see, if you know your heights of your mountains, you'll be able to see the shear that happens around those mountains, that one can actually then pick up, and you'll be able to see if you're going to have rotors or mountain waves for a possibility. Also, a thunderstorm probability is at the bottom there, and we are in thunderstorm season, so I'd like to just quickly show you in terms of how to interpret it. This is an evaluation of the model and then a satellite image, so it doesn't do bad at all. It evaluates quite well. So evaluation meaning how it compares the forecast with the actual. These red and blue dots are lightning. The red is most recent, and the plus and minus means either in between cloud lightning, and the minus, if I'm not mistaken, is then from cloud to ground. So you can see they were quite active. This was earlier in the year taken, and then here it actually gives you the forecast from 60 to more than 80%. And it actually forecasted these 60% areas, and when I took then the satellite with the exact forecasting time, it was actually quite accurate, not bad at all. You can see where the 60% is actually where all these active cells have actually developed. The model that is used, for a little bit of a background, it's a high resolution model, so meaning it's a 4.5 kilometers. So this big grid that you can see that's mapped over SADC or South Africa, within this grid, we have 4.5 by 4.5 little blocks in that big grid. So it works like a camera. So the bigger the number and resolution of your camera, and the more pixels you have, the more detail in your image. So with modeling, computer modeling is just the reverse. So the smaller the number, the more detail we get. So under observations, to make sure just before takeoff, have a squiz, look at your METARs, look at your destination METAR, check if the route, the weather that you were given when you had your briefing, maybe you briefed yourself, maybe you phoned us, have a look. Always monitor. It changes very, very quickly. Sorry, that's why I'm just looking at the George METAR. Currently overcast at 500 feet there, so I'm monitoring that. Hopefully there's no warning there just yet. But so as I said, you can actually see the color coded METARs there. We have radar available as well. Satellite webcams, which is also very handy, especially for that Kruger National Park in Mpumalanga, Nelspruit area. That's actually a webcam at Nelspruit at the bottom there. And you can see that mountains towards the east. So on the other side of those mountains, we would look towards Mozambique. And there's the runway as well, so you can see if you know how high those mountains are and the cloud cover starts to push in over that, you can actually start to know how high that is, and you can monitor it real time, live, and see how it dissipates and lifts. So that's why it's very handy. There's a couple, and then also I know your domestic hub, where you have your SIG charts, that's where you find them, as well as your wind charts. That's giving you those bob winds. Your SIG charts, as we can see there, one will be able to see really nicely where your mountain waves are, and what type of systems on its way, and where it's clear of significant weather. If you click on the most recent one, it will give you the most recent available forecast. So always, please, doesn't matter what product you look at, please look at the date and time, to make sure that the things are updating and that you're looking at the most recent forecast. So Windy is another tool. It has a display of 4 models now, and ECMWF has recently updated, so it's now a 9-kilometer resolution where it was 28. GFS is 22 as well. So they've improved a lot. Windy TV even has satellite imagery as well, so that also gives you good means of monitoring and seeing where your clouds are and those type of things. We are definitely available. You can phone, and even if you have a question of what type of cloud is currently over Gauteng, please, you're more than welcome. Any questions, if we can help, we're definitely keen on helping you with any weather type of questions. So yeah, I think that's all from my side. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone is safe, and hope to see everyone in the next new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. As always, very insightful. I think just before we close, Caroline, Ari, and Annelie Elf, if you can just switch your cameras on, if you can, just so that we can all say goodbye, and a thank you to our audience. I must say, after our discussions yesterday, just in preparation for this, we were also worried that all of us were going to have a problem with load shedding, and we got through it, guys. So it's amazing. I'm glad that we decided to do this and continue with the webinar tonight. And just again, to all of our speakers, Lauren, Ari, and Caroline, a big thank you from the team at Aero South Africa. Annelie Elf, thank you for all of your hard work this year. I know how much you care about the event and the brand, and specifically this, because it really is, it's the purpose of these webinars is to try and keep everybody safe. And Annelie, don't worry about your little guy coming in. This is a time for family, so it's you know, this is what it's about. And then just to all of our delegates, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad that you weren't affected by load shedding. And if you haven't watched any of our previous webinars, please head to aerosouthafrica.co.za and you can view them there. We will also be sending out a recording of this webinar as well. And I think now, just to end, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all, you and your families, a very Merry Christmas and happy holidays, and please be safe. So from us all at Aero South Africa and Safety First Aviator, all the very best, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Take care.
Ditto.